When it's centralized technology, you have very few actors that own the keys, and you just need to find those actors and compromise the keys. So a number of exploits were in that regime, kind of attacking centralized protocols. I think we have not exhausted the throughput and limitations of layer 2s to begin with. So I think, going to yet another layer, it's a little bit premature. Real-world asset tokenization, right, RWAs. And that category itself, from my view, seems like it is going to be often launched in its own chain or private environment with connections on and off to other environments. Yeah, chain abstraction is the way to build applications that allows users to interact them without knowing what chains they run these applications on. So RWA it's a category that is slower to move, right? I don't think this is a category that will go through a hype, which is potentially good. On the AI side, I won't comment too much on what we do, but I do think it's became a little bit of a meme in crypto in the short term. I think a lot of the technology that's been built, has no grounds to reality, unfortunately. So I'm pretty skeptical.
Hello à tous l'équipe, j'espère que vous allez bien. Aujourd'hui on se retrouve pour une nouvelle interview. Cette fois-ci j'ai le plaisir de recevoir Sergey, fondateur d'Axelar. Aujourd'hui on va surtout parler interopérabilité parce que je sais que c'est un sujet qui est très 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 important. On se retrouve avec beaucoup de Layer 1, beaucoup de Layer 2 et donc je pense que ça va être l'occasion de voir quelles sont les solutions pour éviter une fragmentation des liquidités et surtout permettre d'avoir des jetons un peu partout parce que c'est assez compliqué de les transférer d'une chaîne à une autre et de pouvoir les utiliser proprement. Et donc, ça va être l'occasion de discuter de tout ça avec Sergey. Hello, Sergey. How is it going?
Hey, great. How are you?
I'm doing well. The market dipped a bit and I think a lot of people panicked about that. It's quite fair because of the war and everything, or at least like what's happening in the world. So I hope the things will get better. I'm very happy to receive you today for this podcast. I think you are one of the most interesting people when it comes to interoperability. And I really wanted to have like your perspectives on what's happening when it comes to like the modularity approach. Also have like your vision and perspectives on the monolithic approach like Solana did basically. And see, basically what you're cooking at Axelar. So maybe to start, could you introduce yourself and especially what you did before Axelar? Because I heard you were working at very interesting companies, including IBM. I think you did a PhD at MIT and also work with Algorand. So having like all this background would probably help the audience to understand who you are.
Awesome, for sure, yeah. So my background in the distributed systems and cryptography, as you said, I worked on, kind of many different projects across the domains, worked a little bit on software-defined networking stacks, worked a little bit or a lot on cryptography, I would say, right? So I did my PhD at MIT in, cryptographic tools, used a lot of things like people leveraging today, everything from like fully homomorphic encryption, kind of zero knowledge, kind of attribute-based encryption, kind of the list goes on and goes on. And then after grad school, joined University of Waterloo as a faculty, so ran a research group there. Afterwards, took a leave to work on kind of startups. I worked on the Algorand protocol kind of pretty much all the way from day one with the team out of MIT, Silvio, my co-founder, Yorgos. So we kind of launched the platform together a number of years ago. And then, after Algorand, it was pretty clear that we're going to need to scale the ecosystem horizontally with many chains, with many different layers, right? Everything from data availability, consensus, execution layer, which is a pretty natural trend in the development of technologies. But that always comes with the problem of fragmentation. Right? So, we started Axelar to try to address this problem is that how do we keep on scaling the stack sort of horizontally, still keep everything as connected and as united, as unified as possible. And so that's what we've been working on at Axelar. It's been, pretty awesome to build this stack so far and, see it kind of go live.
So basically, I've been being involved in the ecosystem since 2016, something like that. And like in 2017, people were already speaking about like interoperability. So that was kind of like a dream at this time. And now it gets, I would say, more realistic. So what's the situation now? Like how much progress have we made? Are the solution mature? Are you happy with what you're building and what's available? Or like what is the state of the art now?
Yeah. So yeah, great. To your point, I think interoperability, is not a new topic. We didn't invent it. I think people have been thinking about it, but people have been thinking about it for very different reasons that I think we have. Right? So as an example, interoperability within Cosmos and Polkadot was always there, but it was really kind of engraved to scale those ecosystems, right? So Cosmos wanted to have like a cluster of Cosmos chains that all interact with their IBC protocol. Polkadot had their own cluster of parachains and they were interacting using their interoperability protocols. Those protocols historically have, been designed to work within those homogeneous ecosystems well, but outside of those homogeneous ecosystems, they're not as efficient to scale, right? Kind of a 2021, when the kind of good markets kind of picked up and a lot of chains picked up in their activity, we saw an array of really low-tech, crappy bridge solutions being rolled out, right? And unfortunately, we've seen many of them being hacked, right, over the years. Unfortunately, many people lost funds in the process. That was a result that actually the demand outpaced the technology a little bit, right? So kind of, the interoperability protocols were not ready. Nobody was really thinking about it from the bottom up. What does a secure interoperability stack looks like? But it's very easy to set up a centralized, insecure interoperability. Okay, Coinbase and like every centralized exchange does. You put a server between blockchains, you can read and write messages, but you just have to trust that server, right? So all of those kind of solutions got hacked, unfortunately. And so now we're kind of at an era where I would say market understands the need for interoperability, right? Understands that this is the only way to really grow the ecosystem, right, in a unified way with simple developer and user experiences. And more mature interoperability stacks like Axelar are picking up more and more traction, right, and kind of continue to scale. I think there's still more work that needs to be done, both on the technical level, but also on the developer experience level and user experience level, right? It's still not where I certainly want to see things, but I think we're making, a lot of progress towards that way. And I think, like I said, at this point, I think quite a lot of people realize that's the only way this ecosystem keeps growing, right? It's it is a stack that needs to be easier to use and easier to build on across multiple chains. Because developers and users are kind of fed up going from one chain to another or thinking, where do I build my application, right? They spend a lot of time just thinking about that, and that should not be the thought. They should be built everywhere.
Yeah, I think you mentioned that like 70 to 80% of like the development time is dedicated to making sure that the application is available to like all the EVM chains in a way. And I think you kind of like solve a part of it. I wanted to get back to your point when it comes to like the hacks and exploits we've seen. Was it because like we were like growing too fast, or because like we haven't made like enough audits? Like, are we do we still have like a lot of solutions that are vulnerable? Because like I believe we haven't seen like a huge exploit or hack like for a while now. Or maybe I'm not correct. So what changed? Like, and is it still something that could happen, or is it more safe now to kind of use those breaches or those kind of solutions you're building, or for example, Wormhole worked on?
Yeah. So what happened? I would say two things happened. The demand outpaced the technology. The technology that was rolled out was very centralized. When it's centralized technology, you have very few actors that own the keys, and you just need to find those actors and compromise the keys. So a number of exploits were in that regime, kind of attacking centralized protocols. And then there were a number of, attacks on the protocols that didn't have robust engineering practices, right? So due to maybe complicated design or other, limitations of the protocols, they were very complex. And if it's a complex protocol, it has a large code base. So finding bugs, even if you're doing an audit, is very, very complicated, right? And you only need one of them to take down the protocol. So simplicity was never really, a factor in some of them. So they got compromised. So it's a combination of, very centralized designs, right? Complexity at the protocol layer that mingles a lot of the functions together, with poor engineering practices in some instances that didn't have the proper bug bounties, many audits, rate limits, and like additional safeguards in place that resulted in those attacks. I think everybody has learned since then. frankly, right? Like I know, Wormhole is spending a lot more time on their engineering practices now. We've been doing it from day one, so they had to, right? That's the only way to survive, right? In some sense, to do that. So yeah, I think the protocols that are out there are definitely doing a better job than this kind of a first generation that went away at this point was doing. I think we can always do more. Is it safe? I do think that for most protocols out there today, the risk is very, very manageable, right? So as an example, many of the protocols have functions like rate limits, right? That would prevent a very large attack that can withdraw all of the funds. Many of the protocols, like for instance on Axelar build, such as like Squid protocol, allows you to never interact with any wrapped assets and directly get native assets. So you are exposed to the transport or bridging risk very temporarily, right? Only maybe for the duration of your transfer, which in most cases actually can be settled like in 10 or 20 seconds. After that, you get the native assets. You don't really care what happens with the underlying protocols. Do they go down or do they get? So better techniques at the application layer as well that allows us to build an overall very safe solutions for the users.
Cette vidéo vous est présentée en partenariat avec dYdX. dYdX est la solution décentralisée qui vous permet de trader les principales crypto-monnaies de manière liquide sur mobile et ordinateur. Contrairement à la majorité des exchanges, vous n'avez pas besoin de vous KYC et vous récupérez la majorité des frais que vous payez. Plus de 60 000 personnes utilisent déjà dYdX et j'en fais partie, alors qu'attendez-vous? Scannez le QR code sur votre écran ou utilisez le lien dans la description pour créer votre compte avec un simple wallet et profitez de 5% de réduction sur vos frais. Allez, on repart sur l'interview.
And so when it comes to like the solutions available, I think many people heard about like Axelar, but we also heard about like Wormhole. We heard about like, I don't know, dBridge, Hyperlane, those kind of solutions. What are the main differences? And why do you believe like Axelar has like a better approach to the problems that are on the line?
Yeah. So the main difference is, one, I would say kind of security at the very core of it, right? Like I said, we've been taking security very seriously. If you look at, for instance, like a Uniswap security assessment report that analyzed all of the bridges out there, they spent, about like 6 months researching and understanding the stack, the practices. It was only Axelar and Wormhole that passed the security due diligence, and a lot of protocols like, Layer 0 and a lot of others failed, right? And they failed as a combination of both design limitations as well as bad security practices. So that's one. Security is at the core of what we do. Axelar is a permissionless network. It has over 75 validators running and supporting it. There's no, you cannot censor anybody. Anybody can transact. Anybody can participate. So it's really powered by proof of stake security as the most of the chains that we connect today. So very strong security at the very core of it, with additional layers of application security, audits and so on and so forth built on top of it. That's number one. And the second point I'll mention, which is a really big differentiator of Axelar, is the fact that it's actually an open stack for building interoperability. Right. So what I mean by this is that Axelar itself runs proof of stake protocol, and it has a blockchain underneath all of this. And you can use the blockchain to program interoperability and make it easier and more accessible to everybody. So as an example, we're exposing various functions through this virtual machine and programmability layer that would allow chains to connect themselves. Okay. So they don't have to call us. They don't have to call anybody. You say, oh, I want to connect to the Axelar ecosystem of, hundreds of chains. I just make one connection. It's a sort of a hub, a transportation hub that I only need to link once. And from there, I can access this, array of hundreds of chains for free. So it's one integration in a completely permissionless mode that gives you access to all of the chains. And only Axelar can do this because it runs, like I said, a blockchain protocol underneath the hood. And the interoperability protocol on it is fully open, that people can come in and make their own integrations, right? So as an example, that allows you to do additional functions, like you can put certain logic on Axelar and you can propagate that logic to all of the chains in under 5 seconds, right? So again, like this is the power of being able to program at the interoperability layer itself. And so, yeah, having an open stack that people can build upon, people can extend, right? And scale is very, very important. And as an analogy, I think during the internet days, we've actually seen, an array of different interoperability protocols being built, right? Like Microsoft had their version, like Apple had their own version of interoperability protocol, like Cisco had their own version. But none of those proprietary protocols that people could not extend really scaled, right? What scaled are stacks like TCP/IP and related things that people can contribute. and people can innovate, and does not give them any kind of a, lock into a proprietary stack. And so this is really the big difference, that because we're decentralized, because it's an open stack powered by blockchain technology and has like a virtual environment and programmability at the core, people can build their own connections, people can extend it, and people can scale it together. And I think that's what, that's really the vision that we have at Axelar.
I believe that now you have like a decent success in terms of like adoption, traction, and everything. Myself, like I'm using the dYdX, and Axelar is very well implemented into it and very useful. But we've seen like all the solutions having like a large also success. How do you explain it? Like, is it all about like incentives and like token airdrops, or is it because like, I don't know, I'm missing something and there is like a technical approach that also makes a lot of sense compared to Axelar, and that might be something you would be inspired by?
Yeah, I think if you actually look at, let's say like the number of chains that are connected, Axelar has the most, right, across the stack than any other, competitor out there. If you look at the real activity, right, you can discount like kind of farming and airdrop stuff, which, is always temporary. I think we're, definitely out there with the top kind of three providers, kind of a wormhole like Axelar, right? And, maybe layer zero. So yeah, I think activity is definitely in top three. To your point, this is a market that's really growing, right? Like people only starting to realize it today. Everybody wants their own chain for good or bad reasons. Everybody wants a new roll up and stuff like that. So the market is growing. The market is huge. The segment is big, but I think we have the most coverage, right? And I think we have a technical to keep on scaling to support, thousands of chains over the coming years. So, we'll kind of keep on building. I do think that the open innovation behind the Axelar stack and the open stack itself is very key to really be able to scale to support thousands of chains. And I think that it does come with deep kind of a technical choices that we make throughout the design of the system.
I believe that you've been kind of critic about like all those layer 2s launching and all those layer 3 launching and creating new tokens and everything. Am I correct, or I haven't understood like your thoughts on Twitter on that?
No, I'm not critical in them launching. I think, a lot of the layer 2s make sense. I understand layer 3s a lot less because I think we have not exhausted the throughput and limitations of layer 2s to begin with. So I think, going to yet another layer, it's a little bit premature. I do think that, there are unfortunately bad market dynamics that incentivize people to launch their own chain as opposed to launching an application, right? And that is because we have seen more and more, more and more value accrual at the, at the infrastructure layer, at the chain layer, than at the application layer to date. And so for sometimes incorrect reasons, teams choose to, launch on a chain where like they still don't know what they're doing on the application side. Maybe they, they're still figuring out product market fit of their application, right? So, and it's a little bit premature to say, oh, we need to own the stack top to bottom. No, if you have a new application and you still find a product market fit, you should launch on the best, chain. With today's tools like Axelar, you can go access for all the chains at the same time. So you don't really have to make a bet on a single chain, but like get your product market fit, right? Make sure your application is usable, users like it. And then you can figure out, okay, we need to, control our full stack like end to end when we have, sufficient volume. So yeah, I think that's the, that's my only kind of a comment with respect to it. I do think like some of the layer 3s are a little bit premature. I think there's definitely enough block space on the existing chains to scale most of the application demand today.
I think your criticism is totally legit, to be honest. I think we've seen like kind of like a shit show on Twitter. We've seen like the market growing, so a lot of people trying to take advantage of that and raising a lot of funds and building or launching solutions that doesn't make sense or already exist and just rebranding it like around a narrative that is very easy to understand and to identify. So totally makes sense on that. You mentioned that we didn't like fully exploited the potential of like layer 2s. But do you believe that we'll see like a large number of L2s, or will like the activity concentrate like a very low amount of L2s in your opinion?
I do think we're going to see a large number of L2s. So the way that I view it is that there's probably going to be, maybe X number of large shared environments, what I call, right? So shared environment where everybody comes and builds, right? You have liquidity, you have easy on and off ramps, you have everything integrated, you have access, interoperability for all the other chains, where people kind of come in and just deploy their smart contracts, period, right? And again, like I do think for some applications that don't have a product market fit, like go and launch on these shared environments across all of them, like get your product market fit first. There's going to be enough, block space. And I think from there, for the, use cases that make sense, for the applications that make sense, once you scale the number of users and you need to control some of these parameters like gas costs, right? You want to control like, your latency, block propagation strategies, UX experience, then you can go and build on top of, a layer 2 yourself. So I think, the healthy technical path is that you launch on a shared environment or across many shared environments at the same time as you can. Get as many users to interact with your app. Find a product market fit. From there, if you have usage, go figure out like your own like layer 2 environment. So assuming the space keeps on growing, which is my strong conviction, I think we are going to get to that point where we see a lot of L2s, right? If the space doesn't grow and we're where we are, I think you can optimize, some of the, you can optimize some of the existing stacks and make them, kind of absorb all of the demand. And the other point is that, we're starting to do more and more pilots with enterprises. So we did like a research pilot with JP Morgan Chase for real world asset tokenization, right? RWAs. And that category itself, from my view, seems like it is going to be often launched in a, its own chain or private environment with connections on and off to other environments, right? So I think that's another use case where I think we're going to see a lot of these, kind of a bank-specific chains, right? Enterprise-specific chains that have RWAs issued with regulatory and legal frameworks and technical frameworks that they can control, because being outside of control is not an option there, with efficient on and off ramps to other public environments or other private environments through interoperability stacks like Axelar.
When you're talking about like environments, are you talking about like, I don't know, using the OP stack, the Arbitrum stack, the Polygon CDK, or those kind of solutions? Yeah. Or are you talking about like, you're talking about it? Okay.
So like concretely, right, like taking one of those, open frameworks to launch your own chain, right? Like you launch it, but you set it up so that you can control, who can write into this blockchain, like asset issuance for it, because you need to actually, in many cases, know like who the custodian is, who has a legal representation of the assets being issued. So those types of, use cases do need to kind of control their stack from day one in some sense.
Avant de poursuivre cette vidéo, je t'invite tout simplement à rejoindre mon Discord dans lequel tu peux retrouver plus de 10 000 traders actifs. Dans ce Discord, on parle de nombreuses choses, notamment on va tout simplement partager nos analyses, nos graphiques, sur quoi on spécule, les différents airdrops qu'on farm, les news en temps réel qui sont partagées par exemple sur Twitter ou sur différents sites. Enfin bref, c'est vraiment un moyen d'être à jour sur ce qui se passe dans l'écosystème. Et en plus de ça, sur ce Discord-là, je vais partager tout simplement pas mal de données et pas mal de choses que je surveille personnellement, donc des données qui sont importantes à mes yeux et tout simplement moi personnellement ce que je surveille au quotidien. Donc ça permet vraiment d'avoir un suivi en temps réel de moi, ce que je regarde et comment je me positionne dans l'écosystème. D'ailleurs, tu peux retrouver mes performances de 2022 et 2023 sur tous les trades que j'ai partagés gratuitement et publiquement. Donc ici, tu as absolument tout le détail avec les positions disponibles de manière transparente, mes positions actives, mon folio, ainsi que tous les trades que personnellement je prends de mon côté avec le suivi de comment je déplace mon stop loss, comment j'ajuste mon risque, comment je me positionne, etc. J'espère que ça vous plaira. Tout est gratuit. Je vous invite à rejoindre. Tout sera en description, en commentaire épinglé. Et maintenant, place à la vidéo.
I've been interviewing one of the members of Polygon today, and their solution, their AggLayer solution looks very promising. Do you have any opinions or views on what they are building? Like, does it make sense to you? Because like from my perspective, that looks very interesting from like a user perspective, because like from now on, it's been quite a big mess, like when it comes to like having enough liquidity on any chain, especially the chains that are launching, that are very new. So do you have any specific views on that?
I haven't looked too much into technical like details of it, but I do think like, to your point, pretty much every ecosystem is now trying to figure out what is their interoperability strategy, right? Because it is such a big, growing demand to solve this fragmentations. user pay points. On specific tech, I haven't like spent too much time of it. It seemed pretty similar, I think, to some of the stuff that we're doing at Axelar, but I don't know the subtleties yet.
There is something I didn't really understood is that sometime I wanted to put some USDC from Eve to all the chains, like including L2s or other L1s and everything. And basically, the system, the satellite system or the squid system wanted to give me like AX or USDC. So does this approach still make sense? Like, does it limit the liquidity on those tokens? Like, are we able to totally redeem those tokens for native tokens? Like, or am I missing something? Because this is something I noticed, and I'm like, whenever I'm switching USDC, I don't know, from ETH to Arbitrum, or from ETH to, I don't know, Osmosis, like, I don't want AX or USDC, I want native USDC. But maybe that's a misunderstanding from my end.
Yeah, so first let's decouple like Axelar as the network and the developer platform from the applications that run on top of it that facilitate like bridging or swaps, right? So Axelar itself like allows you to build applications that do anything from bridging, like, different tokens to swapping tokens, right? So the Axelar platform, you can build any type of application of those shapes. How the specific applications and leverage platform to instantiate those types of functions is up to them, right? So Squid, in the example that you mentioned, I think the way it has been designed to actually swap a native asset for a native asset, right? So you always end up with a native asset. I don't know the routing protocols well enough under the hood. Maybe when there's not enough like liquidity of the native asset that you're trying to get or some other properties, they give you like some intermediary asset in the process. So I don't know those details. But again, this is just one instantiation of protocol. But their vision and their goal is, again, to swap native for native. Maybe some liquidity is like missing for some of these swaps. There are a bunch of other protocols that are building kind of a cross-chain, swaps. There's like IntraSwap as an example. I think they work in a very different model where they're trying to create like an aggregated liquidity pools across different chains. And then there's another types of applications where you don't necessarily think about, bridging tokens, but you really think about using a token in an application completely separately without bridging it to begin with, right? So as an example, like a Prime protocol is a cross-chain brokerage that allows you to take a token, deposit it in an application and take a loan against it in a very different chain without ever having to bridge the token explicitly, right? So that's really the type of UX that we want, is that from a wallet interacting with a token, you get access to this functionality and application without thinking how to bridge it completely. So yeah, a lot of these instantiations, what happens when there's not enough liquidity and things like that, depend on the application-specific logic. But hopefully we're going to see less and less of those instances as these applications mature.
I've interviewed Colton Conley from Fire Protocol like a few weeks ago,
Okay.
And he mentioned that the integration went very well. So happy to hear that. I'm a big Solana fan, to be honest. Maybe you hate it, I don't know. But I really like it because like the UX is great. And the UX is great, and you don't have like this the siloed liquidity problem. Compared to like the Ethereum modular approach, which is quite different. Like, do you think Solana will still make sense like in the like short or midterm, or do you think that the biggest advantages Solana had will lose it like in the future? Because basically so far, like the big advantage is Solana is fast, and basically the liquidity is on the same layer. So you really enjoy like the liquidity that is decent, and the experience is great because of that. But if you solve the problem like on EVM chains, on L2s and everything, that's a different discussion because you lose one big advantage of Solana. So do you think Solana will still stay relevant in the future? And what do you think about the approach compared to the Ethereum approach?
Yeah, so I do think that the monolithic stack like Solana, does make a lot of sense because it is an aggregated, liquidity layer, aggregated like user experience layer. And in fact, given the path that Ethereum has right now towards like really modular stack, I think Ethereum will need to do a lot of work around the interoperability to make sure, the UX and the liquidity is as connected as possible, right, in that process. So I do think, from a technical perspective, it still makes a lot of sense to have these shared environments. But the second point is that I also think that the teams that are going to be relevant, or the stacks that are going to be relevant, are the ones that have innovative teams building. No matter what in the crypto space technology moves, we're seeing this constant flux in Ethereum, where now sort of the main layer itself, didn't meet some of the properties, and so everybody goes to L2s, L3s, whatever you want to call it. That's because the ecosystem didn't really manage to upgrade the underlying consensus fast enough with the right properties. I would argue. So Solana has an incredible ecosystem and a community around it that kind of continues to extend and build the stack. And I think no matter what, like, you need that as the core to keep on being relevant in the space for the foreseeable future.
So basically, you bet on Anatoly and Raj being smart enough to make the right decisions and right shifts if needed.
I don't know who it is. I think there's a pretty big community as well, right? I think we've seen that throughout the last bear cycle, that community kind of was vocal and kind of came together to continue building, right? Continue innovating. So yeah, I think it's a pretty healthy ecosystem from my view.
I would like to imagine a wonderful world we would live in which the UX of crypto would be fantastic. Maybe, I don't know, from I don't know, 3 years from now, what would be the perfect user experience in your mind when it comes to having all those layers and being able to having fully interoperable systems?
Yeah, I think the end goal is pretty simple: allow the user to interact with any application, any asset on any chain or stack with one click, right? In the same way as right now, we're interacting in an application across the world, transferring our data back and forth, across 15 different networks. I think we're going to need to have the same level of abstraction and the same level of experience in Web3. So yeah, you have a wallet, that's integrated maybe in your browser or your mobile device or whatnot. You see an application, you go click, you use it. What chain it's on, how to move the assets and bridge them back and forth. You leave that to the hands of developers, right? And hopefully developers can make the right choices. You can go and dig deeper and investigate it. Of course, if you want, that's the power of blockchain, that everything is transparent and auditable. But from a UX perspective, you don't need to know those things to actually use the application. So I hope we'll get there.
Do you think we'll even mention the names of the chains? I think you mentioned chain abstraction on Twitter.
Right.
What is it about? What is it in your mind, and what should it look like, basically?
Yeah, chain abstraction is the the way to build applications that allows users to interact them without knowing what chains they run these applications on, right? Most users don't care. Most users do not understand the differences between, layer 1s, layer 2s, layer 3s, and those choices of how to build the stack. They should not, right? So chain abstraction is sort of the paradigm of services and the protocols that allow you to interact and abstract all these experiences away. Because, I think if we still talk about chains, 3 or 5 years from now, I would say we are failing as an industry, right? I think this talk about what chain my application runs on will need to stop for the next wave of applications to kind of pick up.
And do you have any names when it comes to chain abstraction? I guess you're working on that, but that's one of your fields. But do you have any other big systems or solutions that you're very excited about when it comes to chain abstraction? I don't know, maybe initiatives that makes a lot of sense and you would like to support.
Sorry, you cut off a little bit. You said any what? Any technology? Or?
Any initiatives, basically, that support this narrative and this view of tech.
Yeah. So one pretty excited service that we just rolled out is called Interchain Token Service. It's a very simple kind of a single UX that allows a developer to launch chain agnostic token across 60 plus chains that Axelar supports with one click. Okay, you don't have to pay gas on all the chains. You don't have to set up wallets on all of those chains. It's one developer portal. You come in, you specify the parameters, you click all chains, it just goes out there, and like Axelar stack will figure out how to deploy that token in every chain, how to pay gas, and make sure it all looks the same, right? It's the same address. You can send it back and forth. You never have to think about bridging that token through different experiences later. So that's one example. It's a service we just started to roll it out a couple of months ago. It has huge initial activity. Over 1,000 tokens have been deployed using this service, and I think the trend will continue. And then the second big thing is, we launching a virtual machine on Axelar, and that would allow us to program the network even more and continue this chain abstraction paradigm even more, with services that allow developers to kind of build the application once and then run it everywhere, right? So that's really what we're going for.
That would be crazy.
So that's getting.
But would it be only like EVM or like even non-EVM? Like what is it about? Like, I mean.
Yeah, I think the start is probably going to be EVM, but there's quite a lot of work that is being done to extend it to non-EVM chains as well.
So the goal would be like you build any application and it's compatible basically to all major layer 1s and layer 2s, I guess.
Exactly, yeah, and deploy there and run it as a unified application, right? Not as an application that like is separate from one another, but really like it's one coherent environment. Just gets to interact with users from all of those different ecosystems at the same time.
But I mean, that would be crazy. Like, are we like very far from that?
I do hope over the next few years we'll get there, right? With it's an effort by us building the protocols, plus it's an effort on the education, and it's an effort on the developer part to switch to thinking about chain agnostic paradigms. Like I said, right? I think there's we talked about it earlier. There's a lot of waste of developers thinking about where to build, and if they realize that you don't have to think about that, you'd rather contribute to this sort of chain abstraction and like a chain agnostic development frameworks from day one. I think we're all going to be, winning at the end of the day with much better experiences.
I think I wanted to mention like a few buzzwords that are like always on my timeline that are real world assets and AI. Like, do you plan to do any stuff related to those two narratives? Because I think you mentioned both basically on Twitter. So we've seen like huge initiatives on AI, especially from BitTensor, Fetch AI. We've seen also Autonomous. I've interviewed the founder of Autonomous, which is working on autonomous agent systems. And also on the other side, when it comes to real world assets, we've seen like BlackRock launching its own like tokenized fund. So what are your views on all of that? Do you think like Axelar will play a role in all of that? Do you have any thoughts or alphas to share?
Yeah, so RWAs, we have a lot of projects around them, right? Like I said, there's a pilot with JP Morgan that we did that produced, 70-page report for how tokenization and settlement of RWAs could happen across different environments. We're working with a lot of the new generation of stablecoin issuers, like On the Finances using Axelar to issue, their new stablecoin across multiple chains. We're working with, Providence. We're working with Centrifuge, right? So RWA is a category. It's a category that is, slower to move, right? I don't think this is a category that will go through a hype, which is potentially good. I think it's a category that will go through, rigorous frameworks, understanding by regulators and, institutions for how to launch it correctly. Once it's there, I think it's going to be huge. That's one piece. On the AI side, I won't comment too much on what, we do at Axelar in this, but I do think it's became a little bit of a meme in crypto in the short term. I think a lot of the technology that's been built, has no grounds to reality, unfortunately. So I'm pretty skeptical. There are exceptions. There are some projects that I, respect and look up to, but it is a meme in crypto that, is not very well grounded, unfortunately, with technical problems that need to be solved to make it real. So I'll leave it at that. I won't, comment on what we do in the direction we'll kind of have to wait and see.
Cette vidéo vous est présentée en partenariat avec dYdX. dYdX est la solution décentralisée qui vous permet de trader les principales crypto-monnaies de manière liquide sur mobile et ordinateur. Contrairement à la majorité des exchanges, vous n'avez pas besoin de vous KYC et vous récupérez la majorité des frais que vous payez. Plus de 60 000 personnes utilisent déjà dYdX et j'en fais partie, alors qu'attendez-vous? Scannez le QR code sur votre écran ou utilisez le lien dans la description pour créer votre compte avec un simple wallet et profitez de 5% de réduction sur vos frais. Allez, on repart sur l'interview.
I wanted to learn more about like what excites you aside of like Axelar, because I guess that Axelar is like most of the time. I mean, you've been working heavily on Axelar. I guess it's still the case. What excites you, like in Web3 or maybe outside? Like what takes your time aside of Axelar?
So in general, what excites me is the technology that allows us and other people to build platforms that are incredibly efficient. Okay. And when I say efficient, I don't mean about throughput. I mean economical, capital, community efficient, right? So, as an example, I always tell to our team, what we do at Axelar, we have a pretty small team, it's just over 50 people working right now, has huge impact. So the scale of like people to impact when you build the right platform is just a huge multiplier, right? And, that's not the true, like, this is the reason why I think, a lot of the banking and other sectors will have to be rewritten because they don't have this efficiency, right? They're not platforms. They're operated by a lot of manual processes around them. So automating this and building frameworks that allow you to have, 10, 20, 100 people working on something that can serve, millions of people is the most exciting part to me. I think, distributed systems, blockchains, sort of AI are types of stacks that have this potential and have these properties, right? So, the reason that I like doing this is because it has huge impact. But the catch to that is that when you work in a smaller team, the work in a smaller team is a lot more pleasant than working in a large organization institutions, at least in my experience.
Oh, yes. I mean, I kept my team quite small because I enjoy doing that this way. So
exactly right.
But
like
you cannot achieve like huge goal with like a very small team most of the time. I mean, you could like at least solve a part of the problem, but not like at scale.
So I think the blockchain tech that's used for coordination across different environments, across different heterogeneous communities. I think AI technology that's is a information generation machine in some sense are going to be changing that more and more. I'm not saying every field and every industry can benefit from it, but definitely a lot of technology stacks and a lot of communication stacks can benefit from platforms that are self-service, right? There are really platforms, and I think if you look at like OpenAI team, I think this is like a couple hundred engineers, right? Like shipping features like every month. If you look at the impact that they had is incredible. If you look at blockchain systems, decentralized applications, they're all small teams, the ones that make it, kind of manage billions of dollars in liquidity and assets. So I do think this new generation of stacks is a lot more efficient, right? The multiplier is bigger, to your point. Maybe it doesn't cover everything, but the multiplier from people to the impact is a lot bigger. And that's like the most exciting part to me, is to make sure how big can it get and how tight can you sort of keep the team to make sure everybody's happy while doing this work.
Usually when like small teams create like huge application that like gets like billions of dollars, it ends with like the SEC attacking them. So what are your thoughts about like what's happening like DeFi wise? Like we've seen like Uniswap being attacked. Like, are you scared about that? Like, is it like something critical you're keeping in mind, or like you don't really care for now?
I mean, we're definitely mindful and thoughtful. Everything we do, we try to be as compliant as possible to the extent that there is compliance or regulations, right, in the jurisdictions, where it makes sense. I think it's unfortunate that, we live in a sector where to innovate, you have to, think through a lot of the things with a lot of unknowns in some sense, right? You talk to different like lawyer and legal teams. There's definitely a lot
Never
of
the same
unknowns.
Answer.
Yeah, it's different, sometimes conflicting answers. It's a lot of unknowns that they cannot have a prescription to us, right? Like to the projects that are trying to follow it. So sometimes that becomes harder. So yeah, my hope is that like I said, I think the technology stack behind blockchains is probably just as important as, technology stacks like behind AI, because it is needed for coordination. It is needed to prevent even a lot of like AI trust issues, right? Blockchain is good at solving trust if used correctly. If used correctly, that's the key word. So I do think it will have an immense role to play in the society. And I think if we, exclude it from some jurisdictions or some, nations, they're going to have to look for this technology elsewhere, which will be pretty unfortunate.
Thank you very much, Sergey. I just wanted maybe to finish this interview because I'm taking a lot of your time. Just finish the interview with like people you would like me to interview, or at least that feels like relevant, interesting, and like exciting to share to my French-speaking community, because like I believe in the French-speaking community we have like still like a large number of people, but since like a lot of contents are like in English and not subtitled in French, they are hard to understand and access. So do you have any people in mind I should interview and host on my channel?
I mean, there's a lot. I think the list of smart people, keeps on growing. I think, Osmosis is doing a lot of interesting work, right? Founders like the team, Sweet Blockchain, I think, is doing a lot of incredible innovation. So the founder team is incredibly strong. Continue to make a lot of progress. So there's a lot of like zero knowledge projects that I kind of, look up to and sort of admire and try to understand what they do. So yeah, I would look at those segments.
Thank you very much for that. Do you have any maybe thoughts or things you would like people to remember about this interview and about this interview for the French-speaking community, especially?
I mean, my final point is like I said, I think chain abstraction and interoperability is probably the only way that we can grow this ecosystem together, right? Unless we build better developer and user experience, I think we're going to be stuck in the same loop. So I hope we break through it and kind of get to the next level. And yeah, I would say to people kind of, in some sense, start thinking about chain agnostic applications, user experience. If your favorite dApp is not chain agnostic, go talk to the founders or the community of that dApp. Let's get it to be easier.
Let them reach out to you.
Let them reach out to us. Yeah, I think Axelar or not, I think that's the only way to grow as a community. I think everybody's fed up with experiences across multiple environments right now, and it has to stop.
Thank you, Sergey.